Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Gaming Podcast. A little bit different this week. Unfortunately, poor Brad is out this week because he's unwell. So I'm taking the opportunity to publish an excellent interview that I had with our man in Japan associated with anime, Japanese culture, and quite a lot to do with mech or mecha. So enjoy whilst we talk about the mecha scene in general and Armored Core 6 in particular. Today we have a very special guest. We're speaking to Ollie Barder, and Ollie and I have been online friends for probably about 20 years or something like that. So it's pretty crazy. Yeah. So first off, how are you, Ollie? How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I mean, we used to write for NTSC UK, didn't we?
We did
Yes.
Back in the day. Yeah.
And that was when you actually had to import games to play them, which is kind of but no, all I remember that was you, because you were in charge of all of the final editorial in terms of the reviews, and you were like the gold standard of reviewing, which I loved. No, you were very, very good. You were like easily one of the best editors that I've ever worked for, because basically you made a good bash of basically making the reviews like a lot more coherent and also sort of linguistically sound, because a lot of us, needed some help with that starting out. But yeah, no, you were always very nice about the stuff that I wrote, which was always very good. And yeah, we were just talking about the whole kind of editorial thing. It's just that because I've written professionally as well, and generally a lot of the editorial side tends to want to interfere and change what you want to say or talk about subjects they want you to cover. Whereas like where I am currently, I don't get that. I get basically given a very broad remit, which is very cool. But anyway, sorry, I'm just kind of digressing already.
Not at all. No. Thanks for that. I did enjoy that time a lot, and I did enjoy the editorial side a great deal. And I don't get to write as much as I used to, which is a shame. But I'd liked kind of shaping things to the house style and stuff like that, but not treading on people's individual voices as much as possible, which is hard line to tread sometimes. But
a lot of the professional, so-called professional editors I've worked for have been far less competent than you were, and more important, they always it wasn't so much about the voice. It's like they often had their own sort of agenda of what they wanted to cover, and you didn't do that, and that was, I thought, quite remarkable. And the more I look back on it, it's like how rare that was, and it really kind of annoys me that you were never. You should be allowed to run some of these websites these days, because you do a much better job than most of the editorials that are actually currently doing it.
Well, yeah, maybe. Yeah, if I could find a way in and get paid a lot of money, then I would probably do it.
Well, that first thing you're right there is it's unbelievably cliquey. And I had hoped it would have kind of changed over the years, but if anything, with the advent of online, it's only gotten worse somehow. Which I think is a real waste and a shame, because a lot of the gaming coverage is now being ousted quite rightly by people on streams and things, because basically the authenticity that they bring to kind of reviewing games is sadly lacking in the normal traditional written press. It just frustrates me to watch that, because it's an unnecessary way of becoming obsolete, really. It's like you don't need to do it that way.
Funnily enough, on the podcast, when I was talking about my first impressions of Armored Core, of Fires of Rubicon, I was saying, I went on to digress and talk about the internet binary and how it really upsets me that something has to be either completely perfect or it's absolutely terrible, and that kind of dominates the conversation. It's like a switch on, switch off kind of situation. I'm like, it's fine that things are just okay, or that you like them and recognize they're flawed. There's variance there. There's a bit of nuance involved, and I don't, that doesn't exist in a lot of things. And I agree that streaming, and Twitch and stuff really helps with that, because those natural reactions as they come out, when people go, oh, you can do that, oh, that's cool, or oh god, that menu interface is terrible. These are natural reactions, and they can't really be taken back, which has that level of honesty that you're talking about, I think, which is really good.
Yeah. But the streamers are generally I think there's a lot more diversity of opinion with basically people who are playing the game or games in general. Whereas I think with a lot of the written press, there's kind of a weird agenda that they've already kind of made their minds up on something. And I think Armored Core 6 is an example of that, because it's kind of interesting because I think a lot of what Armored Core 6 is dealing with right now is coming off the coattails of Elden Ring. And unfortunately, it's kind of weird because Armored Core 6 isn't that much of a deviation from the older Armored Core games. It's pretty much what an Armored Core game should be, bar a few little changes that are actually, either accentuations of stuff that was already there or sort of an addition from another game. But generally speaking, it is an Armored Core game. And it is very much an Armored Core game in terms of its structure and, even right down to the people they got to do the mecha design. But because of Elden Ring, it can't really be ignored anymore. So in that regard, it's like they're begrudgingly covering something that they really wish they wouldn't have to. And unfortunately, fortunately even, is because Elden Ring was quite a difficult game, and the Souls games are quite difficult. Complaining about difficulty in a game like Armored Core is kind of not really an excuse anymore, and which is kind of funny because the Armored Core games were always challenging. So yeah, it's kind of it's lovely in a way to see a lot of these people having to deal with it, and not have any kind of real excuses apart from begrudgingly admit this is actually a pretty good game. Yes, they always have been pretty good games. Some of them were terrible. Some of them were genuinely terrible, but most of them were pretty good games.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, isn't it? I can't think of very many examples where a series has been like lampshaded back into the public consciousness by the success of something else they've done. I mean, I know it's kind of happening now with Bungie and Marathon, which I think is another one of your big faves, isn't it? It's
well, the thing is, I don't know what they're going to. Yes, it is. Marathon is one of my all-time favorite, game series. Yeah, good memory. No,
don't ask me how I remember these things. It's
no. But I think mainly because it was a mixture of the level design and then the utterly incredible writing, and it was really, really well written, and the interesting thing was this new game I don't think has any single player elements to it whatsoever. I think it's purely a PvP loot shooter. So we'll see how that turns out. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, but the thing is From Software's done this a lot over the years, where in some ways Elden Ring's success was kind of a cumulative thing from the previous Dark Souls releases, Sekiro, Bloodborne. It kind of built up to that. It didn't just kind of come out of nowhere. But what I find interesting, and I think was very smart on the part of From Software, because they published their own games in Japan, is they used the success of Elden Ring to kind of diversify and to get promotion for a previously overlooked series. So I think it was a very savvy move on their part from a business standpoint. And yeah, it's selling decently. I still think it's weird that they didn't promote the mecha designers. I don't know why they didn't do that. I knew about who was doing mecha design for years. Obviously, I didn't say anything because I didn't want to ruin it. But it was very strange that they didn't promote that beforehand, because on the previous games, the mecha designers were an integral part of the game's promotion, and they had a big kind of cachet behind it. So I don't know why that changed or why that was done differently.
I was going to ask, like going right back to the beginning, what initially got you interested in mecha and like mecha games sort of specifically?
That's a very good question. So I think with all mecha stuff, it kind of stems from anime. And you see, I think Macross Plus would be a good starting point, because it kind of showed you that these were machines that had to be controlled, and it was incredibly difficult and complicated, and they had their own rule sets of how they worked, and it was bespoke to that particular setting and story. So it was kind of like a narrative rabbit hole trying to figure out how this all worked. And then you figured out, there's a guy that actually designs all of these and has to figure out how these things work in an imaginary sense, but they have to be consistent and all this kind of stuff. And then from a gaming standpoint, it was kind of an extension of that, because basically it's like, well, a game itself is an abstract rule set of something you're trying to make that's either an allegory of something that's in the real world through a different functional viewpoint, or something completely imaginary. And with the case of mecha, because they have their own rule set that's kind of baked into how they're designed, so form follows function, what they look like is what they can do, you end up with kind of like a double crunchy, a game is an abstract set of rules with another abstract set of rules within it. So I think it was because it was a really involved and complicated and difficult and interesting sort of premise to kind of want to be able to pilot something that doesn't exist, but you kind of have to figure out how it works. And each mecha is, or specifically each mecha game or each interpretation is functionally very different. So there was always this immense amount of variety and complexity, which was just very, very attractive.
Yeah.
So it's like Virtualon, which I think was probably one of the first ones that I really got into. That plays nothing like how Armored Core plays. This goes on to a whole other really interesting conversation about how mecha action games deal with targeting. So with human-related, because I've worked on things like Gears of War and Fortnite as a game designer, so I kind of have a bit of a back-end understanding of how some of this works. So when you have like human movement speeds and people walking around with guns, with a game you have to have certain numbers of movement and targeting assists for things like a gamepad in order for it to work. In order for it to be manageable, and much of that is linked to the relative movement speeds of people. So I'm Master Chief, but I'm running around against other humanoid aliens and I'm shooting them. But the speed you're walking at is at most running speed. So those assists have to work within that velocity-based framework. Yeah. But with mecha, you're moving at speeds 10 times or 100 times that. So those particular movement and targeting assists break down. So you need something a lot more potent in terms of the assists to help players track the targets. So there are basically two main solutions, kind of, back in the 90s when they had to deal with this problem. And one of them was Virtualon, which basically used when you dashed and then fired, it would then auto track and then fire in the direction of your opponent. Yeah. Because of the relative movement, you had to kind of predict where they were going to be. So it was kind of like wrong-footing tennis, but in reverse. And the other one was Armored Core, which basically had a targeting window. So if you got an enemy within range into that targeting window, the weapon would then track the target and you'd be able to hit it. Now, in Armored Core 6, they've basically combined both versions finally. So you have the normal old school Armored Core, you put the weapon, the target window over the enemy and it locks on for you. And then you also have the target assist, which actually automatically locks you on and then you orbit around it. The interesting thing, like they did a cool trade-off, which is the target assist version has slightly less good tracking than the manual version. So there is actually, you can keep up with it manually, go for it. But I actually think that the target assist, that's technically the only really what I would call new thing to Armored Core 6 in terms of the actual functionality. The rest of it is just pretty much old school Armored Core. But the way that they implemented it, because some of the people are saying, oh no, it looks just like Souls. It's like, no, it predates Souls. And specifically, it's an implementation that's taken from another series of From Software games called Another Century's Episode. But the actual the system and the setup they're using actually predates Souls by a good few years. So, so I think that's kind of the only really new thing. But it's not new to From Software because they used this kind of setup in other games previously, and it's definitely not new to mecha gaming. So, what I find really interesting is like a lot of people are trying to look at Armored Core 6 through the lens of the Souls games and Elden Ring, and they're having a really tough time understanding. So, I went tangent again. My apologies.
No, it's cool. No, it brings up more questions as well. So like the way that I, from a non-technical, in terms of game design and game development sort of perspective, the way that I've looked at it and been playing it is what I feel that the best mecha games do, which is first off, it gives you that sense of weight, it gives you that sense of inertia, of using momentum, and that you're battling gravity, and the variance, the difference between being ground bound and being airbound, airborne, and the amount of power and control that you have in those two different sort of environments. And what is really great and fascinating about it is kind of managing and maintaining, as I say, velocity, inertia, conscious of like the change in enemy position, the size and the capability of what you're facing, making those adjustments on the fly whilst also keeping in mind the amount of power you have available. And that's a lot of things to balance. And my perspective on the genre as a whole is that's probably the reason why there aren't more mecha games. They're certainly not in the West. I know it's it's different.
Yeah, so this is the thing is there are loads of mecha games. It's just for some reason a lot of them don't get released outside of Japan. I mean, in the last 10 years alone, we've had loads, but a lot of them are like landlocked, which is weird. I don't really understand that. I mean, some of them, or they just don't get covered, which is weird. So like Gundam Extreme Maxi Boost On is one of the best games that's been released on any console for decades. And that has an amazing arcade heritage, which again stems from Virtual-On in terms of its functional origins. And then you've got, more recently, which is SD Gundam Battle Alliance, which almost plays identically to Armored Core 6 in terms of the whole lock-on staggering, cycling through your weapons, trying to get, airborne and use your melee weapons a lot more overtly. What else? I mean, you got the Metal Wolf Chaos remake, you got Border Break, you got the Gundam Battle Operation games, Daemon X Machina, which was on Switch and Steam, and then you have like the meta genre itself, which is things like you got the Front Mission games getting re-released. You then got Super Robot Wars V, X, T, and 30, which all got given international releases, which is kind of insane. Mech Warrior 5, and then you got both Titanfall games, which again, I mean, they're very Western mecha games, but the origins for those are very much Japanese in terms of how the mecha work. But yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot of it is either the same thing, like a lot of mecha games just don't get the coverage, and I really still don't understand to this day why that is the case, or they just don't get released outside Japan. And I think part of the problem is that the press just don't want to cover it, and I still don't know why. But in the case of Armored Core 6, they didn't really have a choice, which I think is absolutely wonderful, because, they couldn't ignore it, which was brilliant.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and quite rightly as well, because it's an excellent game. And it took me a while to get into, because I'm not a big fan of the Soulsborne games. I don't like that. I'm not criticizing them. I know they're excellent games, but that there is a mindset. There's a kind of, I want to be broken over and over again. And then when I win, when I achieve victory, it's because I've been driven to my absolute extreme. Which is really good. It's a great philosophy in a game, but it's not one that I particularly enjoy. But like Armored Core have always had like a real, not prescriptive, but you have to follow a path of sort of not least resistance, but of best build to get.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's always been an Armored Core thing, and if anything, the Souls games got it from the Armored Core games, because the Armored Core predate Souls. But I'm kind of on the same page when it comes to the Souls games in general. I mean, the only Souls games I really enjoyed, I think, was probably Demon Souls, and the remake I thought was amazing, mainly because it had so many good quality of life changes. Elden Ring I thought was good, but I didn't really kind of jive with it so much. But a lot of Souls, when it came out, Demon Souls, it was really weird, because like so much of it, there was elements from Armored Core, which was kind of odd. Which I thought was kind of interesting, because the origins for the Souls games technically come from like the Shadow Tower and the Kingsfield games, but through basically how they made the Armored Core games. So it was kind of weird. But yeah, the Demon Souls, I mean, I like Demon Souls a lot, basically. But Armored Core 6 is kind of, it's kind of, you have to use normally the right build in the right situation. Though at the moment, some people are saying that the meta is pretty simple, because when you get to a certain point in the game, you just need 2 Gatling guns and 2 grenade launchers, and then you're done. You can just basically finish the game with that configuration, which is mostly true, actually. But I actually think the balancing on this time around, it's a bit on the simpler side, but they're going to fix that in various patches in the future. So this is kind of a typical thing with Armored Core, like when Armored Core 4 came out, and then For Answer, like the balancing on that when it first launched was just terrible. So they then fixed multiple patches. And then with Armored Core 5 and Verdict Day, they were just constantly patching the game to kind of fix a lot of the meta. So it's kind of really interesting, because a lot of the guys that I used to play with Verdict Day a lot are playing Armored Core 6, and they're just saying the game's broken. So, which I find hilarious. But they know that a lot of this stuff's going to get fixed because From Software did it last time. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the kind of the belly aching screaming about some of this stuff online is kind of just give it time, they'll just fix it. So
yeah, and I think it will probably develop enough of a community to hang around long enough for that to have the positive impact that it deserves.
Even with Birthday, which didn't have as big a community as this. I mean, they From Software were very diligently patching it. A lot. I fully expect that they're going to be doing something similar with this. So
they are all about the long tail, definitely.
Yeah.
So one thing that I spotted that I'm not sure anyone else has really mentioned is that the thing that it reminds me most of from the last few years is Ace Combat, and particularly the most recent one, Ace Combat 7. And I was wondering what your thoughts were. Have you played much of that? And do you think there's a similarity?
I played and finished that. I love the Ace Combat games. And I'm all about the Strike Wyvern, which you unlock after the campaign. No, the Ace Combat games were always kind of a bosom buddy of the old Armored Core games as well. Like, a lot of the PS2 games were actually very influential. I think there was a kind of a fair bit of cross-pollination. So the Ace Combat games, in terms of the mission structure and everything, like the whole general flow of like taking the right weapons into combat, getting the right plane for the right mission. It's I would say like the back end garage part of Ace Combat is a lot more streamlined and straightforward compared to Armored Core. I actually still think that's one of the biggest problems that Armored Core has is like in Armored Core 6 they do a good job of actually explaining what you need to do in the missions, which is actually pretty typical of the older games, but I still think they needed something in the garage, like a mechanic that would basically help you to figure out, for this mission you're going to need this configuration, or at least point you in the right direction. Because I think people that got stuck on Balteus, which I think is like the first chapter boss, like if you've got the right build for that, you can take him down pretty quickly. And you need to know, like, okay, so with the OS tuning, I need to have a weapon hanger so I can use a laser blade, so I can switch from a pulse gun to a laser blade when I stun him, and then I can do damage. And, it's just, there's a whole bunch of stuff that, you know what to do. But unfortunately, it's kind of like the way it teaches you is it like beats you over the head and you have to learn the long way round. And I actually kind of think that was a bit of a, because I think that's one of the problems that, I think also in the first level, like it doesn't really explain to you what's going on, and it's trying to teach you, but it's like a silent teacher where, this is the test, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it, which I think is I think it's a bit unfortunate they did it that way. But once you've unlocked everything, I mean, you can just destroy everything pretty much. It's a lot of it is the game is trying to teach you stuff. I think because the game has 3 endings, not to spoil anything, and each of the bosses really are just a damage race, really. I mean, you can kind of look for openings, but to be honest, by the end of the game, and to be honest, by the end of the 3rd playthrough, I mean, you can just destroy the boss in like 30 seconds. It's kind of ridiculous, actually. And it's kind of frustrating because when I played it through the first time, it's like some of those bosses were pretty annoying. Because it's like I physically couldn't do enough damage in the time I had. And I had to figure out what is the quickest way I can impart the most amount of damage to this thing. And then by the end of the game, it's like I can actually do so much damage. It's
the OP. Yeah, it's kind of got that Gran Turismo thing a little bit.
It's also a little bit different. It is the linear OS tuning upgrades. Those do kind of break things a bit. It's kind of a new team that's working on this, and they were trying to reimagine what the old Armored Core games, and they were like, I'd say 85% on like that's what an Armored Core game is, and there's a few extra tweaks that they've done that are kind of inspired by Armored Core or inspired by other mecha games that they've made. So
I was just going to say it's got that Gran Turismo thing of going back in, redoing races in GT to like get extra credit so you can ridiculously overtune your spec. I think
older games did that a lot better though, because I do feel like by the end of the 3rd playthrough, it's like your build almost doesn't matter, which I do think is a bit of a shame. I actually got to play the game like a month before it got released. for like a behind closed doors thing. And I remember going against that first boss for the first time and going, "Are they serious? This is the first level." I think I actually killed it first time, but I remember thinking that is gonna really like limit a lot of people. They're gonna have a really tough time with that. They're not gonna follow what you need to do. Like the learning curve on that just first mission is just silly.
It is. Yeah, they could have just they could have done a couple of things. They could have, I think, a no fail state would have been a good idea, or a kind of time limited thing, or one of those deliberate loss kind of first missions.
Like in the first level of Demon Souls, you fight the phalanx and it kills you. I mean, you can technically defeat it, but it kills you and then it sends you to the Nexus. So dying is actually how you progress. And that's kind of like the soul. I thought that was going to be like a concession to the Souls games. Like you start a mission that's really hard and then you have to start the game proper after that. But no, it was a proper, because I watched other journalists like having to play through that level like 5 or 6 times in Japan. I mean, these are Japanese journalists that are familiar with the Armored Core games, and they got really stuck and they couldn't figure out how to kill it. And it was just like, why are we doing this? The thing is, I was just like, why would they force you to fight this impossible boss? I found that kind of hilarious at the same point, but also kind of a bit of a blunder, because it definitely pissed off a lot of people on Steam, as far as I can see. Yeah,
exactly. That's great. I have loads more I could talk about, but unfortunately, I'm gonna have to go back to work. So,
apologies about that.
No, it's cool. So I want to leave it on a question that is probably going to be really hard to answer. But what would your ideal mecha game look like?
Oh, there's already a few of those. So first Virtualon, Armored Core Master Arena, Armored Core 3 Silent Line. They're all very different, I suppose. And Armored Core Verdict Day, Steel Battalion, the first one on Xbox. And Gundam Extreme versus Maxi Boost On, seriously, you should buy that on PS4. It works beautifully on PS5. One of the best mecha games made, at least in the last decade, with a serious amount of arcade, heritage behind it. It's a proper thoroughbred multiplayer game, that really good. But there's so many. I mean, in terms of mecha action games, those are definitely the ones, and they all kind of have a different interpretation. Like Steel Battalion's very much a simulation. And then obviously, if you want to look at more like the tactical RPGs, I love the Front Mission games. I love Super Robot Wars games. Super Robot Wars 30 was amazing. Super Robot Wars T and X are probably my favorite of the recent ones. But there's so many to choose from. So many good stuff at the moment. But cool. A lot of like the older Armored Core games. I mean, I kind of put Armored Core 6 sort of, it's a kind of a solid Armored Core game. It's not a bad one. It's a good one, but it's not the best as far as how I look at it.
Yeah. So. Okay. Oh, that's fair. Yeah, I'm enjoying my time with it.
It's a good game. I'm enjoying it. I'm taking my time with it. I've unlocked everything. I've done all the endings. I've found all the hidden weapons, found all the combat logs. The last thing I'm doing is just chipping away at the S ranks, and then that's literally the last thing I'm going to do. Yeah. So I'm just S ranking the game now because I'm a completionist, and that's it. So.
Excellent. Well, thanks for your time. It's really been a good chat, and hopefully many more good Armored Core and copies to come, because I can never have too many mecha games. So
no, neither can I. So thanks, Stu.
Take it easy.
Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye. Bye.